You know, they say that love is forever, but your forever is all that I need, YouTube. What's up? It's your boy, Julian, back here again for another video. Today we're talking about arguably one of the biggest emo scene, mall, core, whatever kind of bands of the past, I don't know, 7 or 8 years. That's right, Sleeping with Sirens. Sleeping with Sirens are a band from Orlando, Florida, who currently reside in Grand Rapids, Michigan, according to Wikipedia. They come from the post-hardcore and metalcore universe, which I'm going to call Risecore on this, because they were on Rise Records. A lot of those bands were on Rise Records. You got your Attack Attacks and your We Came as Romans and your Of Mice and Men's. Sleeping with Sirens come from that scene, and they eventually, after their first 2 albums, evolved into more of a pop rock or alternative sound, which has been the cause of a lot of controversy and splitting, dividing among fans. A lot of people say that after Let's Cheers to This and after their acoustic EP, they just completely went to shit. Anything after Feel, a lot of people say just is not good, isn't worth it. But you know, the records they've released in the past 5 years or so have their fans too. They're still a big band. So what I want to get into today is to look at each Sleeping with Sirens album, look at their career trajectory, and ask the question: are Sleeping with Sirens a fluke? Were With Ears to See and Eyes to Hear and Let's Cheers to This the only good music they had to offer, and after that everything is shit? Or do the records starting with Feel and Madness and Gossip, are they actually good, and do they actually have something to offer? I want to give my 2 cents on this, I really do. I've been listening to a lot of Sleeping with Sirens, and I think that they're an interesting band. You know, it's interesting how they started out at one place, and then now they're kind of going every which way with their recent albums. So let's get into it. Right off the bat, let's start with their first record, the classic, With Ears to See and Eyes to Hear. So this album is definitely the most post-hardcore, metalcore, Rise Records core of their whole discography. That might have something to do with their 2 original guitar players. This is the only album that those 2 guitar players played on. They had 2 new guitar players by the time the next album came around. So that might have had something to do with it. It also, maybe Kellen was just really into that style at the time. I don't know, but despite it being the most post-hardcore, metalcore of their discography, it was a super catchy and poppier version of that Risecore style going on at the time. It had a lot of energy and super catchy melodies that just stick in your head, and it wasn't just breakdown after breakdown like a lot of the other bands at the time. I think it had similarities to Emma Rosa as far as creativity within the confines of post-hardcore at the time, and some of the melodies and lyrical content remind me, honestly, of bands like Copeland or Daphne Loves Derby. I think that a song like If I'm James Dean and You're Audrey Hepburn, the lyrics and melodies of that song are very Copeland-esque, very mid-2000s MySpace indie rock. But if you just took that and put it over a heavy post-hardcore instrumental with breakdowns and some screaming, and I think that's a very interesting thing that doesn't really get talked about with this album. I think that was very unique for them. But maybe that's just my opinion. Maybe, does anyone else hear that? I know Kellen Quinn loves the band Copeland and actually named his daughter Copeland after the band, so he probably had some influence from them. I think this record might have been a bit of a guilty pleasure for kids in the scene at the time, because it's definitely a lot poppier, and dare I say, cheesier than the super heavy bro, 2-step, punch each other metalcore going on at the time. But despite this, it still had huge quotable scene classics such as If I'm James Dean, You're Audrey Hepburn, and the title track With Ears to See and Eyes to Hear. Lyrics from those songs were, you know, everybody's photo captions back in the day, everyone's Facebook status, I think your mouth should be quiet cause it never tells the truth. Everyone was fucking feeling that shit. Not to mention the heaviest song in Sleeping with Sirens category by far is on this record, Captain Tyin' Knots vs. Mr. Walkway, with a straight up metalcore breakdown with a synth line at the end with screaming over it. This song with its super catchy chorus, almost funky bridge with auto-tune over it of course, and respectable metalcore guitar leads over the beginning, honestly gives early I See Stars or Of Mice and Men a run for their money. And this song is interesting because it shows they could do this style very well if they wanted to, but the record isn't just a record full of Captain Tie Knots for the whole thing, like a lot of the bands at this time. They had light acoustic songs like Let Love Bleed Red, which actually has Aaron Marsh from Copeland featured on it, so there you go. I think that's, you know, like I was saying earlier, I think that's maybe a little proof of that I'm right in making that comparison. He's on the fucking record. You know, but you have soft acoustic songs like that. You have songs like You Kill Me in a Good Way, which definitely has its metalcore roots and ties, but is something a little different than the bands in the scene were doing at the time. So it shows that they didn't just make a record where every song sounds the same. They've got, you know, a little bit of this, a little bit of acoustic, a little, you know, a little bit of kind of mathy stuff on the title track with Ears to See and Eyes to Hear. And the interesting thing is all of these styles tied together nicely on this record. Despite exploring a lot of different styles, they made a cohesive record still, which is difficult to do. One qualm I have with this album is that it feels more like an EP that they had to stretch out to be a full length. It's really only 8 songs long. Track 6, Don't Fall Asleep at the Helm, is more of an interlude than a song. And track 10, Dance Party, straight up isn't even a song. It's just some piano and synth parts over fake drums, kind of like one of Chiodos' interludes on All's Well That Ends Well. I also have some problems with the track listing on it. I think Don't Fall Asleep at the Helm could have actually been a great first track, but maybe that's just me. Despite these shortcomings, this was a classic album in the scene, and definitely they laid down the groundwork for something great to come from it. And what was something great that followed? Their second record, the classic, the undeniable, the album that bought all the houses. Let's cheers to this. Alright, now what can I say about this record that hasn't already been said by anyone who knows Sleeping with Sirens? It's an iconic album. Every song is a banger, literally no skippable tracks all the way through. The band sounded truly inspired and in their own lane. Every song has meaning and each track is individual, yet it comes together as a full, cohesive record. The 2 new guitar players, Jesse Lawson and Jack Fowler, joined the band on this album. It has more of a pop rock sort of feel on it, so that might have had something to do with the 2 new members, but I think it was also sort of in Kellen's vision as well to make the band less of just a straight up post-hardcore Rise Records act and more of a band that could tour with We Came as Romans, but also do a tour with, say, Mayday Parade. On this record, Kellen sounds great. Jesse Lawson has taken over screaming duties, which adds a nice dynamic to their sound. Every song has an extremely catchy chorus that sticks with you and keeps you coming back for more. A Trophy Father's Trophy Son is probably one of their, if not their most meaningful song in their whole catalog. Even deep cuts like the soulful, swingy Your Nickel Ain't Worth My Dime and the breezy Postcards and Polaroids would be standout tracks on a lesser-known band from this era's record. This record truly holds up over time and is definitely their defining album and has already, in my opinion, reached somewhat of a classic status within the scene. To me, this record sounds just like the summer of 2011. It always takes me back to staying up all night with my friends in early high school, and it reminds me of a simpler time. You know, it always brings me back to that place in my life, but maybe that's just me. I digress. And also after this record, you had their acoustic EP, which had acoustic versions of some of the With Ears to See and Eyes to Hear songs and some new tracks, including the hit off of that one was Roger Rabbit. That EP was also a very defining one for them. It was very, you know, not a lot of Rise Records core bands around that time had the diversity in their sound to make an acoustic EP, so that made them stand out even more. And overall, this was a big time for Sleeping with Sirens. They truly blew up with this record with, you know, the singles If You Can't Hang and Do It Now, Remember It Later, and Roger Rabbit off the acoustic EP. 2012 was a huge year for them. They were truly riding a high at that point, and were really in their own lane, doing their own thing, and just killing it. So what happens after that? Now, this is where it brings my original question, were Sleeping with Sirens a fluke? Because this is when they started making records that didn't have the same flair as old Sleeping with Sirens. They were trying different stuff, and the beginning of this era starts with their third record, Feel.
Congratulations. They say you're the man.
Alright, y'all, Feel. Let's get into it. What do I think about Feel? I think it's decent, but forgettable. It doesn't have the same flair that old Sleeping with Sirens had. The songs aren't terrible, but it does not feel nearly as inspired as the first two records. It's a lot more ambient and airy sounding than their previous work. There are definitely some great standout tracks, but the record as a whole is too long and clunky to get through a listen of the whole thing. It charted at number 3 on the Billboard and sold 60,000 copies first week, which is a huge accomplishment for a band coming from the Warped Tour scene in 2013. But I feel like that success is almost more of a testament to the hype that came from Let's Cheers to This and the acoustic EP, rather than because of the actual quality of the songs on feel. On this record, it seems like they were desperately trying to try new things and separate themselves from the pack, but it comes off as misguided at times, with the cock-rocky congratulations and the out-of-place Machine Gun Kelly feature on Alone, along with tracks that just don't sound like Sleeping with Sirens, like the goofy Deja Vu. Despite this, there are definitely high points like Free Now, which is a beautiful song, and the song Low, which I didn't really like at first, but it definitely grew on me. Although the problem with these standout tracks is that they feel more like Let's Cheers to This B-sides or deep cuts rather than something new and stand out. Most of the songs blend together, and I feel like I'm listening to the same song over and over again. Now, I don't hate this record, and I definitely think people hate on it more than it deserves, but the problem is I think they had a really good path laid out for them as a band who were really paving their own lane in the scene full of monotonous cookie-cutter bands, the breakdown risecore bands that I was talking about, and definitely deserved their success, but I just don't really know why they made such a misstep with this album. It just doesn't pop like the old Sleeping with Sirens used to. Before this record, I just think they had undeniably good songs, whether you liked the band or not. Their songs were just catchy, and they made real true hits in the scene. Instead, it doesn't feel like they carried those qualities over onto this record. It sounds like they watered it down a bit and made sort of an inconsistent, non-cohesive arena rock version of the sound that they already had. If anything, Feel had a chance to be a really cool album, but at the end of the day, it just wasn't the right album to follow up an album as pinnacle as Let's Cheers to This. And what happened during the touring cycle for Feel? Jesse Lawson, who was a key songwriter for Let's Cheers to This and Feel, leaves the band. He's not feeling it anymore. Jesse Lawson leaves. And Jesse Lawson and Kellen Quinn were really the songwriting team for those albums that were responsible for those big hits that propelled them to a different level than all the other bands at the time. And now, with Jesse Lawson leaving and kind of a record that was sort of a misstep under their belts, along with their early records, which are classics, we move right along to their fourth record, Madness.
Said we like it loud. Yeah, we want the rock and roll sound. No, don't wanna hear no.
Alright, so Madness is the first record featuring guitarist Nick Martin, who was previously in a band called Underminded, and then was in Isles and Glaciers, and then was in Destroy Rebuild Until God Shows, and now he's in Sleeping with Sirens, so some cred there, some hardcore roots with Nick Martin. Now what is Madness? Madness to me is a teenage novelty album. It feels like a different band entirely than OG Sleeping with Sirens. Instead of the Kellen and Jesse writing team, which powered their first two records and Feel, it seems as though Jesse's influence was replaced by the influence of big-name producers and major label executives. The Strays is a good song, but it sounds like a YouTube ad or something that Maroon 5 would write. The best songs are the two singles Kick Me and We Like It Loud, but even those sound like the theme song for a Nickelodeon show from the 2000s like Drake and Josh or iCarly, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. I love those theme songs, don't get me wrong, but that is such a far cry from when you think about where Sleeping with Sirens were on their first two records. I mean, come on. It proved that they could be good in a guilty pleasure kind of way, and these songs are good for what they are, and we'll get to that in a second, but it just sounds like a completely different band, is what I'm saying. However, despite these shortcomings, Kellen's voice shined throughout the record. He probably sounds better than he's ever sounded on a Sleeping with Sirens album. Great production, the drums sound perfect. It's better than Feel in terms of lasting value and standout moments, but it suffers from similar downfalls such as 1. It doesn't sound like Sleeping with Sirens, rather a generic, watered-down major label version, and 2, it's hard to make it through a listen of the whole album all the way through. I think it's a step up from Feel in terms of lasting value of the songs, but still the overall style on this record, I don't know what the hell Sleeping with Sirens were going for. Alright, y'all, it's time for the 5th Sleeping with Sirens record, Gossip.
Look into my eyes, tell me what do you see? Don't believe the lies that you've heard about me, about me.
Now this is where we get to the real juice, the real tea, as they say. Gossip has a major label pop sound, straight up. Unlike Madness, there's absolutely no inkling of their post-hardcore roots on this one. This album doesn't really have a consistent sound throughout it, instead sounds like sort of a mishmash of the different bands, different contemporaries of Sleeping with Sirens. For example, the song One Man Army has kind of Paris vibes, the song Cheers has Panic at the Disco vibes to it, Gossip, the title track, sounds like a Plain White T's song from like '05, Closer has Paramore vibes, in my opinion. Now listen, I'm not gonna say what you probably think I'm gonna say about Gossip, and hear me out. It sounds to me like while this album does have its fans, it's pretty much been universally panned by many critics and longtime followers of Sleeping with Sirens, and kind of the alternative music scene as a whole. People just don't seem to like it, and I get it. It's an easy album to shit on. It really is. People say it's uninspired, it sounds bland, whatever. Now listen, I'm just gonna say this. Do I think Gossip is a good album? Yes. Do I think it's a good Sleeping with Sirens album? Absolutely not. Now let me unpack this further. Let's compare it to, say, Hyperview by Title Fight. Obviously, I'm not saying this album sounds similar in any way, but just in terms of where it falls into the band's career, into their trajectory, right? Is Hyperview a good album? Yeah. Does it work as a Title Fight album? Not really. It sounds like a different band. Listening to Hyperview when you're a Title Fight fan, or listening to Gossip when you're a Sleeping with Sirens fan, is kind of like going into a coffee shop, right? And being mad, being pissed, because the coffee shop doesn't serve any Jack Daniels. Is the coffee shop bad? Is the coffee that they serve there bad? No, it's probably quite good for what it is. But if you go in there expecting Jack Daniels, something completely different, you're gonna be left disappointed. And basically this is what I'm getting to with the career of Sleeping with Sirens and my original question. Are they a fluke? No, I don't think that they are, and I think that they still have a lot of talent and are still making good records. I think that Madness and I think that Gossip really are good records for what they are. However, if you're a fan of Sleeping with Sirens and you've been a fan since the beginning, there's really nothing for you with the new Sleeping with Sirens albums. I think it's important for a band to, try new things and change up their style, but if you look at a band like, say, The Maine, they've changed up their style, but there's still similarities throughout their whole career that kind of links each album together. With a record like Madness or a record like Gossip, it's almost like you're listening to a completely different band, and obviously this is going to alienate fans and make their old fans say that these new records are trash. Because these new records, they aren't trash for what they are, but they're trash in the eyes of the people that were there with Sleeping with Sirens from the start. You know what I mean? I think if these records were maybe Kellen Quinn's solo albums, or albums by, a completely different band, they'd have a completely different reaction, because when you go into listening to a Sleeping with Sirens record, you're already expecting something, because they have classic records. You know what I mean? You're going in there with the mindset of oh, I want to hear something that sounds like If You Can't Hang, or If I'm James Dean or Audrey Hepburn. And it's okay for a band to change their sound over time. I think it's encouraged. It's not a good thing for a band to keep making the same record over and over again. But I think what Sleeping with Sirens have been suffering from is it sounds like they're having an identity crisis. It sounds like they don't know who they are. They're completely ignoring their roots and just making records that, once again, aren't bad for what they are, but just sound like a completely different band. It's kind of like the new Fall Out Boy records. Are the new Fall Out Boy records good? Yeah, they're good pop records, but if you're a fan of Take This to Your Grave and From Under the Cork Tree, unless you have a love for, straight up mainstream pop music, there's really nothing for you in the new Fall Out Boy records. And it's the same thing with Sleeping with Sirens. Fans of post-hardcore and metalcore and all that Rise Records core stuff who are just more into that than the pop stuff, there's nothing really for you on these records. And, it's okay for a band to do that. It's more that the band has every right to change and explore their style, but this is just the case of there's no common thread, really, when you take a record like Let's Cheers to This and then fast forward to a record like Gossip. It sounds like a different band. So basically what I'm saying is, I don't think Sleeping with Sirens are a fluke, I don't think they're untalented, I don't think the new records are bad, I don't think they're uninspired, I just think that they've strayed too far from where they came from. There's a little bit of an identity crisis going on, and I hope that they kind of find their way back to their roots a little bit with upcoming records, you know what I mean? I thought Gossip was good, I think Madness is a fun listen, but hey, there's just not really much there for the original fans, and I think that just kind of harms a band's trajectory in a way. So, yeah, that was it. That's how I feel about Sleeping with Sirens' career and their trajectory. What do you think? Do you think that the new records are just bad? Do you think that they're good, but they're just sound too different from original Sleeping with Sirens to even compare them? What do you think? Honestly, I'm excited to see where Sleeping with Sirens go next, and I've heard that the new record they're making is a little bit heavier than their older shit, so maybe that might tie up some loose ends that they're, you know, experiencing in their career so far. So yeah, anyway, this has been your boy, Julian. Thank you, Emo World. We'll be back again next week for another video.